the default. Now, whether those would continue for decades and decades or be tried and found to fail relatively quickly remains to be seen. Well, all of this is kind of worrisome. I don't know about you, but I look at this and I say, my gosh, what have we done? What have we created for ourselves? What can we do now to ensure that the best case scenario ensues and not the worst? Well, I think we could respond this way. We could just throw up our hands and say, you know, there's nothing we can do, bury our heads in the sand or go on a consumer spree and try to forget it all. And I think, in effect, many people are doing exactly this. They prefer not to look at the obvious. It's absolutely clear what we are doing to not only to the environment, but to future generations. We're borrowing from future generations in a way that can never be repaid. Couldn't be clearer, and yet so many of us would rather just not look at that, not pay attention. But if we choose, in fact, to pay attention, if we decide to do the responsible thing, well, what is the right thing to do? Well, there's a tremendous amount. In fact, work needs to be done at all levels. And I think it's right to start at the personal and family level. Because as they say, you know, when you get on a commercial air flight, please adjust your own oxygen mask first before helping others. If you're struggling, you're going to be of no help to anyone else. And in fact, it's going to take other people's time to help you. So you should be thinking about how you're going to live in an environment of much more expensive energy. Do you know how to grow your own food? How many people here garden? That's a good representation. I figured that would be the answer. Good for you. We should be gardening. We should not just in the countryside or in small towns, but even in cities. Rooftop gardens should be the order of the day in the middle of our most populated cities. We should be learning how to reuse and repair all of the tools that we've come to rely on. But even if each of us were to do absolutely the most we possibly could for ourselves and our families, that wouldn't be enough, because there's so much that individuals just can't do. A glaring example is you and your family can't build an electric trolley line. And we need electric trolley lines. Why? Because the personal automobile just happens to be the least efficient form of transportation ever devised by human beings. And cars, as they are now, rely on liquid fuels for which we have very few replacements. Oh, yes, we have biofuels in very small amounts, but there are enormous problems with ethanol and biodiesel. Unless you're collecting waste fry oil from restaurants and using that, that's fine. But if you're turning crops, food crops, into fuel for cars, you're helping to create a situation where millions of people might starve just so a few people can drive. So what's the alternative to that? Well, we need more public transportation. We desperately need more public transportation in the US, in cities like Auckland. And that public transportation should be electrified because we have lots of renewable sources of electricity. Wind and solar and tidal and all of these things produce electricity. They don't produce gasoline or biodiesel or anything else. So we need more electrified public transport. How are we going to get it? It has to be done by local government or national governments. It can't be done just by individuals. There are many more similar examples. And at the national and international level, we have to create policies like the oil depletion protocol or whatever will be the successor to the Kyoto Protocol to mandate reductions across the board in fossil fuel consumption so that we can wean ourselves off this stuff prior to actual shortages. That's the only way we're going to reduce the impact of those shortages. Fossil fuels really are at the center of all this because it's fossil fuels that enabled the excesses of the industrial era And at the same time, fossil fuels have exacted an enormous cost. Think about all of the problems that beset the modern world, everything from hormone-mimicking petrochemicals disrupting reproduction in humans and amphibians and other animals, to global climate change, greenhouse gases from fossil fuels, the control of governments by the fossil fuel industry. I'm very familiar, we in the US are very familiar with that. Water pollution from fertilizer runoff and petrochemicals, air pollution from nitrogen oxides and particulates, acid rain from the burning of coal and power plants, oil dependency that creates vulnerability to societies from future oil shocks, geopolitical competition for oil, oil wars, all of these things and many more. There are all kinds of problems in the world, many of which go back thousands of years, but the most serious problems tend to be ones that have grown up just in the last few decades that relate specifically to fossil fuels. So if we address this one central problem, our societal dependence on fossil fuels, we will solve a whole host of problems at once. And if we don't address that one central problem, then trying to tackle these other problems piecemeal, one at a time, is always going to be frustrating. We are facing, in essence, a great energy transition, at least as important, and in fact, probably far more important than any of the historic energy transitions of the past, like the adoption of fire or agriculture. The challenge of global climate change makes the shift away from fossil fuels necessary for planetary survival. We know this. We know that this is something we need to do for the environment and future generations. But the impending peaks in oil, gas, and coal production mean that this transition is not optional. Even if we were to say, to hell with the environment, to hell with future generations, we would still be faced with scarcity of oil, coal, and gas. So our only real choice is whether to undertake the energy transition proactively or watch the worst case scenarios unfold. So if we do it proactively, what does that look like? Obviously, energy substitution. Also, just as obviously, economic relocalization. Globalization over the past few decades has come about as a result of cheap transport fuel. And as transport fuel ceases to be cheap, we're going to have to make more of the stuff we use closer to home. And that especially applies to food. Agriculture is going to have to transition from its current industrial model, where we use, on average in industrial nations, about 10 calories of fossil fuel energy to produce every calorie of food. That's going to have to change to a much more labor-intensive, localized food system. Fortunately, we have models. Permaculture is a way of producing food more labor-intensively, more knowledge-intensively, that in fact can feed more people on